Hi, I'm Tenley Mellring with Ryan Nolan. This is our group project for our Business 339 class, and our topic is China, Japan, and the United States from World War II to 2020. So, just to give people some background information on World War II and how the business, um, their business relations between China, Japan, and the United States transitioned after World War II to today. Um, I'm going to explain what World War II was, even though most people pretty much know what it is. It was a global war that's also known as the Second World War. It involved over 30 countries, resulted in more than 50 million deaths, and started in 1939 and ended in 1945. Why did World War II happen? Well, Japan wanted to control Asia, and so they attacked China in 1937. And Germany also wanted control of Europe and attacked Poland in 1949. This led to other countries taking sides, and thus the result of multiple countries being involved. So, how did China, Japan, and the United States get involved? Well, Japan invaded China in 1937, like I mentioned in the previous slide, and the United States obviously heard about this but wanted to remain neutral despite having good relations with China. Many people, many US officials felt that even though we had good standing with China, it just wasn't enough to get us involved in a war. And so it wasn't until Japan bombed the USS Panay and three Americans were killed in 1937 that the US really felt a little bit uneasy about what was going on. And Japan ended up issuing an apology, and the United States accepted it to spare the country from war. And that resulted in a truce. So, despite Japan bombing the USS Panay, at this point, the United States was still really willing to remain neutral. So, under Roosevelt, the United States made aid available to China in 1940 to 1941. And this was really the turning point in their decision to kind of take a little bit of a stance in what was going on. And so at this time, the United States was also the main supplier of goods to Japan, which Japan needed in order to use for supplies for their war goods. And so Japan ended up repealing the truce between itself and the US, which really allowed the United States to bring trade to a halt. And they did this with an attempt to try to get the fighting to stop between Japan and China because they felt like if we put a stop to their goods, then maybe they would no longer have the goods that they needed to continue on with this war. So Japan, instead of putting a stop to what was going on, they ended up making deals with Germany, Italy, the Soviet Union, and France. And this really concerned the United States and therefore led to a number of attempts and deals of negotiations between Japan and the United States. Neither side reached an agreement, and Japan took this stalemate of neither side deciding on an agreement that the United States was unwilling to cooperate. And so they decided to bomb Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. At this point, the United States could no longer remain neutral and they declared war on Japan, and eventually China becomes an ally to the United States. During this time in World War II, there were a lot of things that happened with in regards to the war, and a few of the Japanese wartime atrocities were that they took part in chemical and biological attacks on members of other countries, including China, during World War II. Their crimes included human experimentation, starvation, torture, and raiding. Throughout time, the Chinese and several other countries have shown displeasure over the Japanese failing to acknowledge their part in these various acts of violence leading to conflict. And over on the right, we have some war propaganda poster about the murdering that the Japanese were doing around that time and how angered people were about this. We also have the rape of Nanking, also called the Nanking Massacre, which was a 6-week massacre that started in December 1937 in Nanking and then the then capital of the Republic of China. Japanese imperials either raped or killed and approximated 300,000 civilians in the Chinese capital over this period. It is arguably the most heated topic in China-Japan relations throughout history. China and Japanese historians and citizens have different opinions and facts about the true extent of the crimes. Japan has taken responsibility for them. How did World War II end? So, after the United States declared war on Japan, two sides were formed: the Axis powers, which were Japan, Italy, Germany, and then there were the Allies, which were Britain, France, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, India, the Soviet Union, China, and the United States. And through many battles between the two sides and many lost lives, Japan finally surrendered after the atomic bomb was used on August 15th, 1945, and the war finally ended September 2nd, 1945. So that was a little bit of the background history as to how China, Japan, and the United States all got themselves involved in the war, and just so you guys understand how their relationships were during that time, it really affected their way of doing business and just the way they feel about each other in general from then on, including today and even towards the future. So here is Ryan Nolan now to explain the present day views between China and Japan.
Present day views of China versus Japan. For China, China thinks Japan should acknowledge World War II acts of violence. China also believes its rights to territory in East China Sea. China also believes Japan's use of technology, expertise, and innovations, and it does not like Japan's relationship with the USA, the Philippines, or Vietnam. On Japan, they will not acknowledge the atrocities committed in World War era. Also, Japan wants territory in East China Sea. Its use of China's raw material and large population to manufacture and sell products. And Japan has more history with Western countries such as the USA, Germany, etc. The Trading History, Part 1. Despite World War II ending in the 1940s, the Chinese and Japanese began officially trading as early as 1952. The two had a surprisingly strong business partnership from the start, understanding each other's strengths and weaknesses economically. Trades between the two have not always been viewed as equal, but rather mutual and resulted in higher incomes from both sides. Trading History Part 2. China uses the Japanese expertise in technology and manufacturing to create world's greatest manufacturing sector. China is highest foreign investor in Japanese markets, and China imports more of its products from Japan than any other country in the world. Japan needs to sell in China to maximize its profits. Companies like Sony and Toyota aggressively market in China. Japan acquires raw goods cheaper from China than nearly anywhere else in the region. Japan is the second highest foreign investor in the Chinese markets, behind only the USA. Recent conflicts. Territorial disputes in the East China Sea. Japanese fear of China's growing military arsenal. China dislikes Japan's relationship with the US, the Philippines, and Vietnam. China refusing to acknowledge Vietnam gaining island in the South Asian Sea, something Japan was backing. continued post World War II grudges, and how do each of these countries deal with North Korea? The Americas' role in China Japan relations. According to foreignpolicy.com, 68% of Americans trust the Japanese, while 30% trust the Chinese. However, 43% stated that they thought China was the more important economic partner as opposed to 36% for Japan. Since President Trump has taken office, we will see how diplomacy in these countries is handled, as Obama put effort into a more friendly relationship with these countries. The future. The relationships between the two countries is still volatile and a sensitive subject for many citizens of the two countries. Analysis fear for the future between the two, as China's growing military arsenal could directly affect Japan's future goals. Business and trade continue to be a strong point between the two countries and should continue, as both countries are leaders in the world of technology.
Thank you for listening to our PowerPoint. These are the sources that we used for all of our slides. So if you are curious, you can click on any of these. Thank you.